A strong earthquake has hit off the southern coast of Mexico in one of the Gulf regions there. The magnitude 8 quake was also felt in Guatemala and as far north as Mexico City, where people fled buildings, fearing the buildings were going to collapse. The earthquake has also caused a tsunami in the area. David Mercer is on the line from Mexico City. David, get us up to speed. What else do we know?
Well, that's right. There's been, since this earthquake happened about 2 hours ago, which was very strong. I mean, I live in Guatemala where there's quite frequent earthquakes, and this one rattled the whole building. The room that I'm in right here, right now, was rattling, woke me up, got me out of bed. And there have been a number of aftershocks, I think at least 7 aftershocks over the past couple of hours since the strong earthquake hit. Mexico City, after the earthquake happened, you could hear alarms going off. There was helicopters in the air, presumably looking for damage. There was reports of power outages, other places where people were out filming on the streets when they had run out of their buildings, and they had recorded, power lines being dropped down, zapping in the night air. And then I've been on the line with messaging with some friends and colleagues as far south as El Salvador and Honduras, south of Guatemala, and in Guatemala, where they felt the earthquake as well. In Guatemala, there has been some damage. There has been some damage in Mexico as well, and there have been several fatalities. Now it is 2 o'clock in the morning here. It's middle of the night, and so as daylight comes, I'm sure they're going to get a better grasp exactly of just how devastating exactly this was. And many people are saying that this was the strongest, most powerful earthquake in Mexico since a devastating earthquake back in 1985. From what we're seeing so far, there's nothing to indicate that it's at the same level as that deadly earthquake back in 1985. But as I said, as the daylight hours come upon us, and as people get to sort of these remote areas in the southern part of the country,
David, for the moment, thank you very much.
While southern states struggle in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey and the potential damage of approaching Hurricane Irma, the West continues to battle an enormous wave of multiple wildfires. The spreading blazes have displaced families, destroyed property, closed highways, and threatened national landmarks. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, 76 fires are currently burning across California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. Nearly 1.5 million acres are either still burning or have been burned, with over half of that acreage in the states of Montana and Oregon. Of the 76 fires, only one has been contained.
Hurricane Irma is leaving a trail of devastation as it slowly sweeps across the Caribbean. The island of Barbuda, where Irma made a direct hit, is barely habitable, according to Prime Minister Gaston Brown. He tells local media 95% of the properties there have sustained damage. Images circulating online also show widespread destruction on both the French and Dutch sides of St. Martin. As of Thursday morning, September 7th, at least 10 people have died because of the Category 5 storm. The National Hurricane Center in Miami says maximum sustained winds remain near 180 miles per hour, and hurricane force winds are being felt up to 60 miles from the eye of the storm. The eye is expected to approach the central Bahamas by Friday and Florida by Sunday. Florida Governor Rick Scott is urging residents to heed evacuation orders. He says, quote, "Possessions can be replaced, your family cannot." For United News International, I'm Kimberly Godlaw.
Hurricane Irma is expected to hit the U.S. mainland over the weekend and early next week. The Category 5 storm currently registers at record-breaking sustained winds of 175 miles per hour and is likely to cause some serious storm surges in the Florida Keys. That's bad news for residents, to say the least, and for travelers, too. According to Refinery 29, if you've made travel plans anywhere in the region, prepare for massive cancellations. The majority of Amtrak trains to and from Miami and Sanford, Florida, have been canceled from September 9th to the 11th. Every cruise scheduled to leave Florida on Friday has now been canceled, and the vast majority of cruises departing this Saturday have also been called off or postponed. Most flights out of South Florida will be canceled starting this Friday or Saturday, depending on the airline. So be sure to check with your carrier often and keep checking.
Early on Wednesday morning, Hurricane Irma engulfed the tiny island of Barbuda and its population of around 1,800 with tornado-force 185-mile-per-hour Category 5 winds and storm surge. The destruction was so severe that instruments measuring the storm were destroyed, and the island was completely cut off from communication. 90% of buildings on the island were destroyed. Hurricane Irma severely damaged St. Martin and St. Bart's Islands and had serious impacts in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as well.
While Texas continues to reel from the devastation left behind from Hurricane Harvey, Florida is bracing for an even stronger storm with the approach of Hurricane Irma. Harvey, a Category 4 storm, killed at least 60 people, caused as much as $90 billion in damage, and unleashed 4 feet of water so heavy it caused dams, levees, and reservoirs to overflow. Category 5 Hurricane Irma, the second strongest Atlantic storm in recorded history, threatens to slam into Florida with 185-mile-per-hour winds that the storm system has maintained for 37 straight hours. According to the National Hurricane Center, Category 5 hurricanes are major storms with winds of 157 miles per hour or higher that will cause catastrophic damage. Islanders battered by Hurricane Irma will get little reprieve before yet another storm unleashes on them. Currently, they're dealing with roofs torn off from over their heads and their streets swollen with floodwaters. Hurricane Jose is the next Atlantic storm system. It is not expected to make landfall, but it will bring wind and rain when it brushes by the northern Leeward Islands. They are the same islands just ravaged by Irma. According to the National Hurricane Center, now a Category 3 storm, Jose is a major hurricane. As of 5 p.m. Eastern, it had maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour and was moving west-northwest at 18 miles per hour. It was located about 590 miles east of the Lesser Antilles Islands.
On Wednesday, the sun released the largest solar flare in 12 years, briefly disrupting satellite and GPS communications. According to a NASA press release, the flares came from a part of the sun called AR 2673. Solar flares most likely occur as a result of the sun's magnetic field changing shape in more magnetically active regions, creating a blast of energy and sending tiny charged particles blasting out into space. The 2 flares on Wednesday fell into the X class of the most powerful events, one registering in X2.2 and the second registering in X9.3. The second flare was the largest since 2005 and the 8th largest on record.
North Koreans celebrate their country's founding Saturday, and experts believe the anniversary will be marked with a full-range test of an intercontinental ballistic missile. There have been reports from South Korean media that a North Korean ICBM has been spotted on the move. South Korea's prime minister said some believe North Korea may launch another intercontinental ballistic missile on the 9th, this time at an ordinary angle.
According to a New York Times report, following Pyongyang's earth-shaking hydrogen bomb test, the U.S. has begun circulating a proposal around the UN Security Council that looks to grant the Navy unprecedented powers to use all necessary measures to hunt down North Korean ships at sea. The report states that the resolution would allow the U.S. to halt all shipments of crude oil, petroleum, and natural gas to North Korea. The U.S. Navy would have to intercept, board, and then inspect North Korean ships, a process that would require cooperation from the belligerent nation and greatly increase the chances that violence would break out between the countries.
The U.S. military is reportedly sending roughly 3,500 more troops to Afghanistan. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is said to have authorized the additional troops as part of the buildup associated with President Donald Trump's South Asia strategy. These extra troops would bolster the Afghan military in its fight against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State. The deployment would bring the total number of American troops in the country to more than 14,000, while Mattis last week signed orders to send additional troops to Afghanistan. He did not specify the size of the force. Reports of the 3,500 troops number came after Mattis, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Joseph Dunford, and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson briefed lawmakers on September 6 about Trump's South Asia strategy and North Korea.
For United News International from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
On Thursday, the Syrian army said Israel has targeted a military site in the Hama province that could be linked to production of chemical weapons. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that the airstrike hit an agency which the United States describes as Syria's chemical weapons manufacturer. The strike took place after UN investigators said the Syrian government was responsible for a sarin poison gas attack in April. Syria's government has denied the use of chemical weapons and promised to surrender its chemical weapons program.
China is about fed up with North Korea's antagonism and has agreed that further sanctions from the United Nations are necessary in order to put the rogue communist nation's affronts to rest. According to Reuters, China agreed on Thursday that the UN should take more actions against North Korea in light of their latest nuclear test. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, given the new developments on the Korean peninsula, China agrees that the UN Security Council should make a further response and take necessary measures.
On Thursday, President Donald Trump said that the use of military action against North Korea would be a possibility, but such an event would be neither inevitable nor preferable. During a White House conference, Trump said that military action would certainly be an option. It would be great if something else could be worked out. Trump said attempts at diplomacy with Pyongyang have failed over the past decades, but he insisted that military action wouldn't be his first choice.
Thursday, the Syrian army claimed Israeli jets fired missiles at a military facility in Syria, killing 2 army personnel. The strikes caused material damage near Masyaf in the northwestern part of Syria near the Lebanese border. Former Israeli National Security Advisor Yaakov Meterors said the site was one of the Syrian regime's centers of military research and development. They said the site had produced missiles and even chemical weapons in the past. The strike marks a new level of alleged Israeli involvement in Syria since the civil war began 6 years ago.
On Thursday, China agreed that the United Nations should take more action against North Korea after its latest nuclear test. Pursuing its nuclear and missile program, North Korea said it would respond to any new UN sanctions and U.S. pressure with powerful countermeasures. The United States has proposed to the UN Security Council to impose an oil embargo on North Korea, as well as ban its exports of textiles. On Thursday, China said that the UN Security Council should make a further response and take necessary measures.
The Armed Forces of the Philippines is working with its former enemies, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, to defeat militants aligned with the Islamic State group. The MILF fought the government for years, trying to establish an autonomous self-ruled region for Muslims in Mindanao, but signed a peace agreement in 2014. The AFP news agency reports the military is sharing intelligence with the MILF and providing them with air support in their fight against a breakaway faction of about 60 fighters in central Mindanao. Meanwhile, plans for Marawi's reconstruction continue as the Philippines accepted an aid package from the United States worth 730 million pesos. U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Sung Kim, said the money will go towards emergency assistance for displaced residents and rebuilding Marawi's public services such as water, power, and health care. For United News International in Metro Manila, I am Crystal Yap.
Leaders of Russia, South Korea and Japan are discussing ways to resolve the crisis over the DPRK's nuclear program during an economic forum in the Russian port city of Vladivostok. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday said whipping up military hysteria was counterproductive and the crisis could be resolved by diplomatic means. South Korean President Moon Jae-in assured there will be no war on the Korean peninsula and urged Russia to continue supporting sanctions against the DPRK. Meanwhile, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called for the world to put the greatest possible pressure on the DPRK to abandon its nuclear missile program.
The transgender transition can be different for everyone and doesn't always need surgery, but those that do might not have insurance coverage and can be very expensive. About 20% of transgender people today do not have health insurance. Luckily, however, there is a Christian group encouraging church members to help transgender people pay for surgery through donations. Faithfully LGBT is an organization that shares the stories of LGBTQ people who are of faith. Under the Tithe Trans campaign, they raise money for the transgender community. Faithfully LGBT sends its donations to the Jim Collins Foundation, a non-profit that raises money for grants to cover surgeries.
Plastic is everywhere, in bottled water, in clothing, in cars, even in tiny microbeads used in facial cleansers. But even after plastic is discarded, it can stay around for decades, degrading into microscopic particles that find their way into water supplies. Some scientists call it a significant health threat.
When we manufacture plastics, it's not just the polymer, it's not just the plastic. We put plasticizers, we put flame retardants, we put colorants. You know, we manufacture them embedded with a bunch of chemicals to begin with.
A new study found microplastic contamination to be a global problem. Plastic fibers were found in 72% of the tap water tested in Europe. The problem increased in places like India and was highest in the U.S., where 94% of tap water tested contained microplastic. Plastic is harder and takes longer to break down than glass or other materials. Researchers say once it gets into water, it can be difficult to filter out.
Some wastewater treatment plants can capture up to 90%, and some are losing more than 90% of the plastic. So I think that they are a significant source of microplastic and microfiber contamination in our waterways.
Researchers say the only real way to reduce microplastic contamination is to reduce the use of plastic, and that is starting to happen. Many consumers are replacing plastic bags with reusable cloth ones, and some manufacturers are replacing plastic containers with glass. Still, it could take decades to rid the planet of all the plastic that's already been around for decades. Diane Estabrook, Al Jazeera, Washington.
According to 3 law enforcement officials, President Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security is planning nationwide raids for later this month to target 8,400 undocumented immigrants. A memo that circulated agency-wide in August described the plan as the largest operation of its kind in the history of immigration and customs enforcement. The raids are scheduled over 5 days, beginning September 17th. They are being called Operation Mega. The higher-than-normal target number may be partly driven by an effort to reach a deportation goal at the end of the fiscal year.
The sound of despair as a Rohingya refugee embraces Turkey's First Lady. Emine Erdogan was accompanying Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu to the Kutupalong refugee camp to launch an aid program for 50,000 Rohingyas.
I hope the whole world puts this issue on its agenda. This issue must be resolved through humanitarian aid and politics. Such an atrocity in this age is unbelievable, and it's all happening before the eyes of the entire world. We have come here to help and announce the situation here to the international community.
Turkey's foreign minister said Turkey's plans extended beyond the short term.
We will hold a meeting in Astana with the leaders of the Islamic world and a larger meeting in New York. We want to find a permanent and viable solution to the Arakan crisis.
The Kutupalong camp has been around since the 1990s. It's one of 2 official Rohingya camps, but new makeshift ones are put up every time there's an influx.
This refugee camp and others like it have sprung up since October last year. There are tens of thousands of people living here, and aid agencies tell us that they just can't supply them with enough basic necessities. This is exactly the kind of situation that the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu has come to assess. Çavuşoğlu has asked Bangladesh to allow all Rohingya escaping Myanmar into the country. And he says Turkey is prepared to foot the bill. But aid agencies say that alone won't solve things.
We need to have put an end to what happened in Myanmar. Then we can curb the influx of refugees here. And we can stop not just giving the humanitarian aid, and can start for the long-term projects here.
Until that happens, the plight of the Rohingyas will remain unchanged. Unwanted in Myanmar and in Bangladesh. Shamim Chowdhury, TRT World, Kutupalong Camp, southern Bangladesh.
Early in the morning, South Korea began the final move to secure some protection from the possibility of a North Korean attack. It moved the remaining US rocket launchers and other equipment into place, completing a process that was started in April. The convoy was again met by protesters. They worry the Terminal High Altitude Area Defence, or THAAD system, may affect their health and the environment. The deployment will also strain ties with China at a time when the US is trying to get Chinese support for new UN sanctions against Pyongyang. The Chinese government believes the US may use the THAAD system to spy on China.
China is seriously concerned about the development. I would like to reiterate that China's resolute opposition to the deployment of the THAAD system by the United States in South Korea is clear, consistent, and firm.
What hasn't been clear or consistent is how South Korea's President Moon Jae-in feels about THAAD. Before and after winning May's election, he flip-flopped on the issue amid a policy of trying to improve relations with North Korea through engagement. The South Korean government says the deployment of THAAD is provisional at the moment while more impact assessments are carried out. But it says the threat level is high enough to rush it through. Its defense ministry believes North Korea is planning to launch another intercontinental ballistic missile at any moment. The governments of China and Russia believe dialogue is the best way to de-escalate the tension on the Korean peninsula. Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks with South Korea's leader and said he believes the situation can be resolved peacefully.
Like my Korean counterpart, I'm confident there won't be a large-scale conflict, because all the parties opposing each other have enough common sense and have a responsibility to the people living in the region. They will be able to resolve this problem with diplomatic means.
The United States and its allies need the support of China and Russia at the United Nations Security Council if tougher sanctions are to be placed on North Korea. The Chinese government's consistently staunch opposition to THAAD may put the US effort further in doubt. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
There's constant rain, but still they march on. It's the last 10-day march that started in the city of Charlottesville, Virginia, and is due to end later Wednesday in the city of Washington, D.C. There's over 100 people here. They say they've come here to protest what they say is the rise of white supremacy in the United States since the election of President Donald Trump. The march was organized last month after clashes in Charlottesville, Virginia, between white supremacists and counter-protesters. The violence left one dead and dozens injured. Some are still haunted by what happened.
We're all in shock. We're all hurt. I felt strongly I needed to heal, and I needed to get back on the street, and I needed to finish the march I started.
These marchers say racism remains the fault line that divides the U.S., whether it's civil rights or the environment.
If you ask a significant number of black folks what it means to them, it means ending state and police violence against their people, ending the murder of black people. If you ask indigenous people, it means stop drilling pipelines in their communities and their homes. If you ask the people of Flint, it means giving them healthy, drinkable water.
All these marchers are demanding that President Donald Trump resign. This was a small protest, but an indication of how polarized the U.S. remains. Toby Muse, CGTN.
Blow dryers aren't just lifesavers when it comes to having a good hair day. They're also lamb savers. A newborn lamb in England fell into a freezing water bucket in its pen earlier this month. According to a March 12th Facebook post, farmer Ed D. of West Lodge Farm Park in Desborough, Northamptonshire, found the lamb, quote, sodden and very close to death. D. wrapped it in a towel and took it into his house, but the lamb was slipping away. D. knew he had to act fast to save the little lifeless creature, so he grabbed his wife's blow dryer and started drying his fleas. The Daily Mirror reports that D. then placed the lamb in the plate warming section of his oven with the door open, but this was one lamb whose story wasn't going to end in the oven. The lamb, who earned the nickname Lucky, survived and made a full recovery and is now back with its mother. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Cambry Caldwell.